What if the very thing you believe is making your child stronger is quietly teaching them to be afraid of you? Stay with me, because by the end of this, you'll be able to recognize exactly where you stand, and more importantly, what your child is actually learning from you, even in the moments you think you're doing everything right. A glass shatters in the kitchen. You haven't said a word yet, but your child freezes. Their shoulders pull in, their breathing changes, their eyes drop instantly to the floor. And then come the apologies, fast, overlapping, almost rehearsed. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, I'm so sorry." You just stand there, watching, and something moves through you. Not anger, not satisfaction, something quieter, something harder to name, a kind of discomfort that sits just beneath the surface. Because in that moment, there's a question you can't ignore. Is that respect, or is it fear? That question matters more than anything else you're about to hear, because most strict parenting doesn't come from a bad place. It comes from love, from the belief that the world is hard and your child needs to be ready for it. You set rules because you care. You correct because you want them to succeed. You hold the line because someone has to. But there's a point, a quiet, almost invisible point, where discipline stops building something strong and starts slowly taking something away. Think about this. The last time you left the room, did your child's behavior change, even slightly? Did their tone shift, their posture relax, their choices loosen? If the answer is yes, that tells you something important. Because children who have truly absorbed values don't behave differently depending on who's watching. They don't need an audience to be their best self. When behavior depends on your presence, it's not internal, it's managed, it's controlled. Psychologists call this the difference between extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. One comes from outside, rules, consequences, your authority. The other comes from within, understanding, values, judgment. Control works when you're there. Influence works even when you're not. And this is where things begin to shift, because strictness, when it goes too far, doesn't build influence, it builds dependence on control. And the signs of that shift are subtle, easy to miss, easy to justify. The first sign shows up in the smallest conversations. Your child asks why they can't stay up later. They barely finish the question before you respond, "Because I said so." It's quick, efficient, final. The rule stands and the discussion ends. It feels harmless, even necessary, but something important just happened. Curiosity met a closed door. And when that happens often enough, children stop asking, not because they understand, but because they learned that understanding isn't part of the process. When rules matter more than explanation, children learn to obey in the moment, but they don't learn how to think beyond it. They don't carry the reasoning with them, they carry the boundary and the fear of crossing it. And that distinction matters, because a child who understands why something matters can make that choice on their own. A child who only knows that it matters cannot. Now shift to another moment. Your child spills juice across the table. It spreads quickly, sticky and bright. Your reaction is immediate. You move to fix it, to point it out, to make sure it doesn't happen again. It feels responsible. It feels like you're teaching them to be careful, to improve. But look closer. In that moment, your child isn't focused on what they did wrong. They're watching you, your face, your tone, your energy. And what they're really learning isn't "be more careful next time." It's "this reaction is what I need to avoid." That changes everything. Because when mistakes consistently meet strong reactions, children don't become more thoughtful, they become more cautious. Not in a healthy way, but in a protective one. They stop experimenting, they stop taking small risks, and eventually they stop showing you their mistakes at all. Not because they've stopped making them, but because they've learned it's safer if you don't see. And then there are emotions, the ones that seem small but carry so much weight. Your child drops their ice cream. It hits the ground, and their face crumples instantly. Tears start forming, quick and raw. You step in right away. "Hey, it's okay, don't cry, we'll get another one." It sounds comforting. It comes from love. But what you've done without meaning to is skip over what they were actually feeling. You moved straight to fixing the situation instead of sitting with their experience of it. And over time, that teaches something subtle but powerful, that certain feelings are inconvenient, that sadness should be shortened, that disappointment should be brushed aside. So children adapt. They learn to perform composure. They learn which emotions are acceptable and which are the better kept hidden. And eventually, they don't just hide them from you, they start to lose touch with them themselves. Emotions aren't obstacles, they're information. And when children aren't allowed to fully experience them, they don't become stronger, they become disconnected. Now consider something even smaller. Your child is working on a school project. You walk by and notice it's not quite right. The spacing is off, the heading could be clearer, so you step in, just to help, just to improve it. They don't argue, they don't resist, they just watch. And in that quiet moment, they learn something you never intended to teach, that their version wasn't good enough, that their way needs correction, that your standard is the one that matters. You might do this in other places too, with how they clean their room, how they arrange their toys, how they complete simple tasks. It feels guidance, it feels like care, but those small decisions, that's where independence is built. That's where confidence forms, through repetition, through trial and error, through ownership. When those moments are consistently taken over, one of two things happens. Either they stop trusting themselves and wait for direction, or they store that control quietly until one day they push back harder than you ever expected. And then there's the atmosphere you create when you enter a room. You might not notice it at first, but watch closely. The shift in energy, the way your child straightens up, the way their voice changes slightly, the way what they're doing suddenly becomes more presentable. They're not reacting to what's right, they're reacting to what feels safe. Fear is incredibly effective in the short term. It produces quick compliance, immediate results. But underneath that efficiency, something else is happening. Trust is slowly thinning out. Because when a child is primarily focused on avoiding your reaction, honesty becomes risky. And when honesty feels risky, it gets replaced with something else. Careful answers, partial truths, silence. Then comes perfectionism. It doesn't appear all at once. It builds gradually, through hundreds of small moments. Your child wants to try something new, maybe painting or a sport or something creative. But before they begin, they hesitate. They imagine not being good at it. They imagine the early mistakes. And then, quietly, they decide it's not worth it. Not because they lack interest, but because they've learned that falling short carries weight, that mistakes are noticed more than effort, that doing something imperfectly feels worse than not doing it at all. At home, it might look like high performance, good grades, good behavior, but underneath that, there's a quiet equation forming. I'm okay when I perform well. That's a heavy belief to carry, and it doesn't stay in childhood. It follows them into everything: relationships, work, identity. Then something changes in your relationship. It's subtle at first. You ask about their day. How was school? They say, fine, and that's it. Conversation ends. But later, you overhear them talking to a friend, and suddenly they're animated, engaged, sharing everything, the funny moments, the confusion, the things they're still thinking about. They didn't stop having thoughts. They just stopped bringing them to you. Because over time, sharing may have started to feel like evaluation, like correction, like something that leads to advice instead of understanding. So they adjust, they filter, they protect. Silence in children is rarely indifference, it's protection. And this leads to the final shift, the one that matters most, when connection quietly takes a back seat to control. And many carry it inward. Anxiety, perfectionism, emotional guardedness, not always visible, but deeply present. The deepest cost, though, is relational. It's the quiet weakening of trust, the invisible thread that determines whether they come to you when something really matters. Because one day your presence won't be constant, and when that day comes, control disappears instantly. But connection, if it's there, remains. That's the part that lasts. And this is where awareness changes everything. Not guilt, not blame, just awareness. Imagine the same moments but handled differently. The spilled drink becomes a conversation instead of a correction. The mistake becomes something you sit with before you fix. The emotion is allowed to exist before it's solved. The rule is still there. The boundary still stands, but it's explained, understood, carried. Because discipline doesn't have to disappear for connection to grow. In fact, it works best when both exist together. Children don't thrive when they are managed perfectly. They thrive when they feel seen, when they feel safe enough to be imperfect, when they trust that your presence isn't conditional on their performance. That's what builds something real, something lasting. Because in the end, parenting isn't about how they behave when you're watching. It's about who they become when you're not. And if something in this made you pause, even a little, that's not failure. That's the beginning of something better.